Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks for joining us. Well, Mother's Day was disturbed by gunfire along a parade route last year. This week, the feds made noise of their own with a superseding indictment claiming gang activity. We'll look at area street groups and how active they might be. We'll also examine upbeat activity in the housing market, the governor's speeches to different audiences, and the Darren Sharper case. And we will sift through what to expect from tomorrow's elections. On our ballot are tonight's Informed Sources: Errol Laborde, who is producer of Informed Sources; Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4; Kathy Finn, freelance business journalist; and Stephanie Grace, columnist, the New Orleans Advocate. First, over to you, Mike. And we saw some changes this week in the charges against the so-called Mother's Day shooters, and the feds are now involved in this. Why don't you explain what's going on?
Correct. Not only are the feds involved, they've completely taken over the case. And originally, Akeen Scott and his older brother, Sean Scott, were charged in state court with 20 counts of attempted murder, 19 shooting victims, and one victim who was trampled in that shooting that disrupted the second line on Mother's Day. That has now been passed over to the feds for prosecution. And in fact, the state charges today were dropped in lieu of those federal charges. Mm-hmm. What is interesting is that this is part of a larger gang conspiracy case, which involves two other Scott brothers, the oldest being Travis Scott. He was actually originally indicted on federal drug charges. So this new indictment that now folds in the Mother's Day shooting is a superseding indictment of that original charge against Travis. Mm-hmm. One thing to note, we now can sort of see in hindsight, the police zeroed in on Akeen and his brother Sean very quickly after that shooting. There was, of course, the widely seen video of the shooter and the crowd, getting mowed down. But they had already been pretty deep into this alleged drug gang. And so they were able to quickly put the pieces together, connect it to the gang, which was the Frenchman and Durbany gang, which authorities had been on their radar for years, even going back to previous generations, decades of this gang ruling in that part of the city. Now, to put it into even a bigger context, this is all part of a law enforcement approach to crack down on New Orleans-style criminal gangs, those sort of loosely affiliated, individuals who are, bounded by either blood relations, growing up in the same neighborhood, not, large, sprawling, and very organized gangs that we know about in LA, Chicago, New York. But these are gangs in which they flare up, they can be quite violent in short spans of time. Usually they meet their demise either on the street or getting caught. And to corral this gang problem, there's this multi-agency drug gang task force, mm-hmm. in which federal, state, and local authorities are all participating to do the kind of investigations you really need to take, whole gangs off the street at once. Coming up with those organizational charts, who's the leader, and then the kind of tools that the federal authorities can bring to bear on long-term investigations, wiretaps, surveillance, and other things that can take months, even years to put together.
So is that why we're seeing some of these cases with multiple people being charged in gang-related activity going through the state courts and then some now going to federal?
Well, the federal and state authorities, that would be the DA's office and the U.S. Attorney's office, they sit around on a regular basis and they have basically strategic conferences on which is the strongest way to go with a particular case. Leon Canizero, the DA, has gone with what up until his term in office was a very rarely used state law of racketeering. In a couple cases, the Taliban, 3NG, and the 110ers, all state cases involving a dozen or more defendants. One of them has 20 defendants in state court.
These are all local gangs. So
all local gangs. And this gang task force had its most productive year last year. 74 individuals arrested and charged under either state or federal gang statutes. That's 7 different gangs, and then add this Frenchman in Derby, which is now under federal indictment. That's 8 gangs, and I guess it's up to 83 individual gang members.
Are there issues involving turf here that come up? Because we have, sometimes you would think what agency, state or local or federal might want credit for some of these cases.
You're right.
Are they
and,
working well?
That was a thing of the past where there might have been some friction between a U.S. attorney or a district attorney. In this case, they are cooperating as smoothly as I've ever seen. And you actually have 2 assistant district attorneys embedded in the U.S. Attorney's Office. So they openly share information. They jointly plot strategy, where they're going to get the most bang for their buck as far as prosecuting these cases.
Errol?
It's funny, when Stephanie started by asking about turf warfare, I thought you were talking about the gangs.
No. It's all kinds of turf warfare.
But if in fact it was gang related, what happened on Mother's Day? I mean, why were they shooting at everybody?
Okay, well, just to show the brazenness of these gangs that use violence to either protect their turf or to snuff out rivals, there was a member of an alleged rival gang in that second line. And that the 2 brothers allegedly, one on either side of the street, just opened fire indiscriminately. The intended target was in fact hit. And that actually helped piece together the motive for this. But this had been a long-running feud between these 2 rival gangs. There had been this was actually allegedly retaliation for one of the other Scott brothers getting shot in the face by the rival gang.
So, Mike, real quick, if you could just say, what are the charges now under the federal indictment?
Well, interestingly enough, you went from 19 counts of attempted murder in the shootings and an additional attempt murder on a person who was trampled, down to, an indictment where all the Mother's Day crimes are embedded in one gun charge, one gun count. But the biggest charge is a conspiracy, a drug gang conspiracy involving all 7 members in this one indictment.
We'll be keeping a close look. Thanks a lot, Mike. Kathy, over to you now. And property values and home prices in the greater New Orleans area, people are saying maybe this is a good time to sell after all.
Well, it seems to be pretty good news for homeowners in general. The figures came out recently using the figures from the Metropolitan Association of Realtors. An analysis showed that home prices in the metropolitan area, that's an 8-parish area that they look at together, rose to about $110 a square foot on average for home sales during 2013. And that was a 4% jump overall from the 2012. In Orleans Parish, it was even a stronger increase. The price per square foot went up to about past $150 per square foot, and that's an 8% increase over 2012. So that's a pretty sturdy hike from the previous year. This is a reflection of consumer optimism. Those figures, by the way, were put together by Wade Regas, Real Property Associates, who analyzes the figures from the realtors. But this really reflects growing optimism on the part of consumers and homeowners. They feel strongly that the values of their homes are beginning to rise, whereas they've been a little bit stagnant. And even though the economy has not been that bad in New Orleans, it's been generally stronger than it has been around much of the rest of the country. People still weren't sure, home prices weren't really reflecting that kind of optimism. Now they are, and people feel more confident, and so many who may have been thinking about putting their homes on the market are now doing so. Latter & Bloom reported that in the early part of the year, they had a very sharp increase in the number of pending sales and then closed sales as compared with 2012. So there's a lot of activity. The homes are moving faster off the market. They're selling quicker than they did in previous years. And in addition, you're more likely to get something close to your asking price now. The gap between the asking price and the actual closing price on these homes is narrowing. So you have a much better chance now of getting what you think your home is worth. This is all leading to a lot of activity, and some analysts say that what we're seeing is approaching a seller's market. They measure this based on how long the inventory of existing homes that are on the market actually stay on the market, how long it takes to go through that inventory. And they say that when it gets 3 to 5 months and more, you've got essentially a buyer's market, because they know they can get the price down. Now we're leading, in some places it's under 3 months. And so it has tilted toward a buyer's market. One of the things we've seen in Orleans in particular, I think it's interesting that the parish managed an 8% increase over 2012 in sale prices, because you still have these pockets of chronically underperforming properties. Eastern New Orleans has a lot of those pockets, for instance, where they just really have never recovered from Hurricane Katrina and the devastation. And so to manage those kinds of increases, it's happening because of some of the hot spots. Garden District, Uptown, Bywater, and Marigny. These places are just really hot, and you also see it in Western St. Tammany Parish. So you can imagine how strong they have to be to support that, to bring up to an 8% increase when you have these other areas that are kind of dragging the market down.
And just real quick, how long do we anticipate this trend?
How long will it last? How long before I can sell my home? Well, generally they go in cycles, and I think it doesn't happen fast. We're not in a bubble. I should emphasize it doesn't mean we're in a bubble that's going to burst anytime soon. I would expect that this continues through the year, certainly, and next year probably too.
Kathy, we've seen the spillover from Marigny into Bywater. Now people are starting to talk about St. Bernard and the whole Araby area now.
Well, interesting you should say that, because St. Bernard has had a pretty good increase in these numbers that came in from 2013, both in terms of renovated housing and housing that has not yet been renovated in St. Bernard Parish. Even those properties are selling at higher values than they weren't selling at all before, hardly. So St. Bernard is already looking up.
And across St. Claude, too, here.
And across St. Claude.
And our flood insurance news that came out of Capitol Hill yesterday should probably help.
That certainly did not
a little
hurt
bit
matters.
too.
No.
Thanks a lot, Kathy.
bet.
Okay, tomorrow, Election Day. Go to the polls to vote in Orleans Parish. What is it looking like? First, we're going to go to Stephanie, and I think we're going to take a look at
the
sheriff's race first.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the really interesting stories to emerge from this election is the fact that Marlin Gusman looks like he will be reelected quite handily, the incumbent sheriff. This is someone who's been under such fire. Everybody knows the jail that he oversees is under a federal consent decree now. They've been in and out of court. The Justice Department has basically said it's unconstitutional, incredibly dangerous. You hear all kinds of stories about assaults on prisoners, mental health issues among prisoners that aren't being addressed. The notorious video, of course, came out within the last year. The mayor called for the office to be put into receivership, and basically said that the problem is that Marlin Gusman's not managing the budget properly. And yet, it looks like he's going to be reelected. He's really become the consensus candidate. He's gotten most of the endorsements. Not the mayor, but the mayor stayed neutral, which is kind of a tacit endorsement, I would say.
Considering all the harsh words while they were fighting that consent decree.
And they were in court together.
And
I think the issue is that there's no viable opponent. Charlie Foti, people don't see him as the solution, the former
he's
sheriff.
a runoff against the one guy that Gusman can say, well, look, he was a sheriff too. He was before me.
He started it.
I mean, blame him, not me.
Right. And it's funny because, Foti's out there basically saying, I can fix this in one term. I don't know that anyone really believes that.
And there was a poll that was recently released showing him 30 points ahead. I mean, is that what it's looking like?
It might well be. Again, turnout's probably going to be pretty small. Often in these small turnout elections, you have a more white electorate that could help Foti to some extent, but it really doesn't look like he's gaining traction. One interesting thing that happened the other day, a letter came out from a group of very prominent women in New Orleans, both Democrat and Republican, City Council member LaToya Cantrell and two former First Ladies, Mickey Bartholomew and Sybil Morial on the Democratic side, Suzanne Hyde-Terrell on the Republican side, and some other well-known people basically saying, remember what the jail was like for women under Sheriff Foti, strip searches, and they were talking about the old consent decrees, not the new consent decree. It's pretty harsh words.
So one to watch tomorrow along with the coroner's runoff.
Yeah.
Errol?
Okay. Yeah, in the coroner's race, Dwight McKenna led substantially in the primary. He had 49% of the vote, and he got into runoff against Jeffrey Rouse, who had 32% of the vote. Rouse was an assistant under Frank Mignard, and when Frank Mignard dropped out, he was Mignard's candidate. Some people saw that as maybe a little bit too much strength pull. That's perfectly normal in politics. I mean, if you drop out, that you endorse someone else. If you look at the numbers, McKenna's got a pretty big lead, and this is going to be a big lead to overcome. However, it's possible in this race because McKenna also has a big negative in the community too. And again, depending on the turnout, there's no real negative against Rouse, and so it's not impossible that he can get the vote out and win. If he wins, it's going to be by a narrow margin, but he will. And this will be the first time that people have elected a new coroner in decades now. I mean, that Frank Mignard had the job for so long.
40 years.
Yeah.
And so turnout is key. I mean, the turnout is really...
Well, turnout's key in all of this. And of course, what people want to say when you talk about, it depends on the black-white turnout. Mm-hmm. Not that all these races necessarily have black-white issues, but it depends on who's influencing whom. And real key to this, I think, and we'll talk about this later, is District C, because that's probably have the highest turnout because they have that council race.
Yeah, and we are going to get to that in a minute. I want to get you to at-large right now.
Well, the at-large race, and it's interesting that Stephanie mentioned that letter talking about women's issues in the sheriff's race, because there's several races now where somebody is organizing and trying to organize women behind a candidate saying something negative about the other. And if you look at the numbers, that women are the most plentiful voters in Orleans Parish. And so there's several examples of this. And in the at-large race, there's been Cynthia Hedge Morrell has criticized Jason Williams about some of the people that he's represented, that he's represented people who've had been charges of various abuses against women. Now, the argument against this, of course, is that he's a lawyer, and in lawyer, you're committed to representing your clients. But you are kind of seeing that sort of issue going heavy on this. Mayor Mitch Landrieu came out today with a strong statement endorsing Cynthia Hedge Morrell, the whole one team, one plan, and so in endorsing her.
And this has been such a nasty race. There have been allegations, not just that Jason Williams has defended people who've beaten women, but he texted with a client who was in prison, wasn't supposed to have a cell phone, hasn't paid his taxes. Of course, on the other side, Cynthia Hedge Morrell, there was the incident where she wasn't paying her sanitation fee, and she had the, do you know who I am incident when she was stopped speeding on I-10, and that's been in the ads. It's been nasty.
An interesting one to watch tomorrow. District C also?
Also nasty. Maybe not quite as nasty, but Jackie Clarkson, the longtime city council member, of course, was on her way to retirement from the at-large seat until Kristen Palmer decided not to run. All of a sudden, Jackie Clarkson was back in with a very strong support of Mayor Landrieu. Nadine Ramsey is a former judge, civil court judge, who has been running all this time, and they were really neck and neck in the primary, so this is a heated one. And it's, the issues are experience. Clarkson says Ramsey hasn't been involved in all sorts of issues, the bridge, the ferry, Federal City, all sorts of things like that. Ramsey says Clarkson's been there too long. It's gotten somewhat racial. This is a district that is 56%, I believe, African American, and one of the things Ramsey has said is that Clarkson maybe hasn't always been so sensitive to racial diversity. Clarkson strongly disputes that, of course.
Close race, another one to watch tomorrow, and one more, the Audubon Institute.
This is the sleeper, actually, in this election. It didn't get a lot of attention until the last week or so. It's really getting a lot of attention now. This is a millage that would go for 50 years to support the Audubon Institute.
And it replaces the existing millage. It's not a renewal, it replaces the existing one.
And these millages, the original millages, were passed to build the aquarium and to bring the zoo up to modern standards, which were much more defined goals than I think this one has.
And that's been some criticism, is that we just don't know what's going to be used.
There's a real kind of underground campaign against it. A lot of emails going around, a lot of people on Facebook saying, wait a minute, we love the zoo, but 50 years is a long time. We don't know quite what they're going to do with it. And what about all these other city priorities? Right. So it's going to be interesting to see how that reflects. Of course, the Audubon Institute is doing a big PR campaign with Irma Thomas and Archie Manning and the elephants asking for you.
Yeah, the Audubon Institute and everything that's involved with the Audubon Institute is very well beloved in the city, too. So another close one to see tomorrow.
Yes.
Over to Mike again, the Darren Sharper case. More charges in Arizona against him.
Right, and that was an indictment that came just this week. It's really been staggering to watch how steep Darren Sharper has fallen just a month ago. He was a retired NFL star who made this smooth transition into commentary with the NFL Network.
Had a Super Bowl ring.
Had the Super Bowl ring. Hey, at one point he was in a Hall of Fame conversation. He's 6th all time in interceptions in NFL history. But how the mighty have fallen, it started with an arrest in Los Angeles for 2 alleged rapes that involved allegations of slipping drugs into women's drinks and sexual assaults while they were basically knocked out unconscious. At the same time, it broke that there was a similar complaint being investigated in New Orleans. Since then, the floodgates have just burst open. Allegations out of Tempe, Arizona, which was the indictment this week, Miami, where Darren Sharper lives, and Las Vegas, all in a relatively short period of time, except for the Miami case, which was earlier in 2011. But with each passing week, things seem to be getting worse and worse for Darren Sharper. Originally with the Los Angeles arrest, bond was set at $1 million, which he made without much difficulty, and was a free man pending that trial. Then New Orleans came with an arrest warrant, and so the judge, he answered that arrest warrant, turned himself in, and was going to be released on that unless New Orleans came up with an indictment or formal charges. New Orleans did not.
That hasn't happened yet.
Hasn't happened. The DA here can now sit back and wait because Arizona stepped in with an indictment that went before a grand jury, 2 counts of sexual assault, and on that, he is being held without bond. So all of a sudden, instead of Darren Sharper striding into court, with the suit and his high-priced attorneys, as we saw in court yesterday, he is in a orange prison suit behind the glass cage.
In an LA jail.
In Los Angeles County Jail, which is has a reputation of being one of the harshest jails, right up there with the OPP.
Not accommodations he's grown used to.
And that is, here's a guy who was jet setting and was able to blow into New Orleans,
Mike, let me ask you this, the timeline for these charges real quick. I mean, it's from when to when? Basically
through the fall of 2013, all the way until
January
early in 2014. So really about a 4-month period.
Yeah, and how many charges now against him? Or accusations, I should say?
Now it's 9 individual rape allegations in 5 cities.
In 5 different jurisdictions.
In 4 of the cities, there were 2 alleged victims, and then 11 druggings. A couple of the victims of who allegedly had Ambien-like drugs, slipped into their drinks, were not sexually assaulted. So 11 druggings, 9 alleged rapes, 5 different cities.
4 or 5 month timeline. And we're going to have to jump to the next topic right now. We'll be keeping up with this one, I guess, and just to see where this one is going to go.
It could very well be that he does not get released from jail from this point forward until he, goes to trial on rather strong evidence and could be serving lengthy prison terms. So we may have seen the last of Darren Sharper as a free man for
Were all of these cases after his retirement from football?
All after his retirement. All after his retirement.
All right, thanks a lot, Mike. Right now, back over to Stephanie. And we did have our governor in the state of Louisiana for a while earlier this week.
Yes.
Yeah, for the beginning of the legislative session. Where is he now?
Well, if it's Friday, it must be New Hampshire, right? So that's where he is. He had 2 speeches today. One was in a nonpartisan event where he actually appeared with the Democratic governor of the state, had a nice little stand-up routine, made jokes about Chris Christie, said, well, Chris Christie was going to be here, but he was stuck in traffic. Nah, that's too easy, things like that. Then he went on to the real reason he's there, which is the Republican appearance. He's been all over the place. He was briefly here to open the legislative session. He made a speech, as he customarily does on the opening day. What was notable about it was that it wasn't very long and it wasn't very ambitious, most people say. He talked about his legislative priorities, which consisted of workforce development, certainly admirable, but not red meat, stayed away from Common Core, which is actually kind of connected to education, and technical education, but that's all a hot button issue in the session. He stayed way away from that. Human trafficking, and he did touch on the lawsuits indirectly that are supposed to be a big part of the session. This is the levy protection lawsuits. Then he was gone. And again, in the surrounding this, last week he was at CPAC, the big conservative gathering, where he's been throwing out red meat all over the place, and all different kinds of red meat.
And he's been attacking Obama, too.
Called Obama
President
the worst
Obama.
president ever. Maybe Harvard should ask for its law degree back, which prompted the Harvard Crimson to say maybe Brown should ask for its biology degree back, talking about Bobby Jindal and creationism.
And given his activities jetting around the country, kind of waving the new Republican banner, is this the least thinly veiled presidential campaign ever? Because he continues to deny that he's actively running for president.
What was so interesting was this week he announced the formation of a PAC to support congressional candidates. He already has a think tank that is going to be run by the same person as the PAC, so that's the kind of think tank we're talking about. But what he said, he did an interview with Politico, which is a national political publication he talks to quite a bit. And deep in that story, there was a quote for him that said, yeah, of course I'm thinking about it. Everybody knows that. It's the first time he's admitted it. He went from I have the job I want to I'm thinking about it to all kinds of national publications quoting David Vitter saying, oh, of course he's running for, because
right now
Jindal wouldn't say it.
He's out there on the national stage to help congressional candidates, ostensibly.
Yes, and again, he's done this before. When you contribute to people who have tough elections, they remember it. He knows that. He's done this before.
But doesn't seem to be getting any traction as a presidential candidate.
That's the interesting thing, and he keeps trying new issues, just I think to try to get some traction, and it doesn't seem to be working.
And making talk show appearances, too. Okay, we got to wrap up this conversation about our Governor Jindal and look ahead. Errol?
First of all, I think the James Buchanan supporters shouldn't feel threatened about their guy being remembered as the worst president ever.
There you
go. New Orleans will finish its city elections tomorrow. April 5th is city elections in Kenner. The mayor has 2 challengers, some council seats, also some various elections in Harahan and Slidell, April 5th.
Mike?
Yeah, a follow-up to a story that I did in collaboration with Gordon Russell of the New Orleans Advocate on the Tulane scholarships awarded by each and every legislator. There are now several bills pending to reform that program. We exposed that a lot of these were doled out to insiders and the children of connected either politicians or other insiders. And that could go anywhere from abolishing the program entirely or putting really strict controls on it.
All right, Mike, thanks. Kathy?
New Orleans Entrepreneur Week is coming up March 22nd, and this is an opportunity to showcase local entrepreneurs and finding promising startups among the ranks and file. So if you want more information and to go to all of the events, business plan competitions and whatnot, go to ideavillage.org.
All right, Kathy, thanks.
You mentioned actually the Senate passed the rollback of the flood insurance increases, that similar bill to what the House passed, I think, last week or a week or 2 ago. The president is expected to sign it, and it's not over because we have a Senate race, and we have a Democrat in the Senate, Mary Lander, a Republican in the House, Bill Cassidy. Both really want a lot of credit for this thing passing, so we're going to be hearing about it.
Thanks a lot for joining us, all of you here, and thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you again next week on Informed Sources. Have a good evening.